When it comes to podcasts in general, I mean, they allow for a more naturally flowing conversation. They allow the guests to get their thoughts across without being interrupted. As we see on the mainstream media, anytime a pro-Palestine guest comes on, they interrupt them relentlessly, whether it's to reiterate Israel's claims, etc. Either way, the Palestinian perspective, even when it is aired on the mainstream media, it's not allowed to be fully realized. And, platforms like PalPulse allow for some of these perspectives and not just the perspectives, but also stories to get told. Because a lot of the time, the mainstream media refuses to shine the light on certain stories, certain topics. I mean, currently, maybe it's ill-advised to go into what's going on at the moment, but there is an attack. There's recently been an attack on a Hebrew temple, a synagogue, and that's taken over all of the mainstream headlines. But there's a mosque that was also attacked in East London, and that's received virtually zero mainstream coverage. So our objective at PalPulse is to spread, the truth as much as possible, even when the mainstream media refuses to highlight it. The mainstream media in the West, specifically, always start off from the perspective that Israel is a normal country, that Israel's actions are defensive, and that Israel's propaganda is something that should be taken, at face value. The biases that we see from the mainstream media is, I think, in my opinion, uh, rather it boils down to the fact that there is racism within the ranks of the mainstream media. The editorial line is that the Palestinians are always suspect and that the Israelis are given the benefit of the doubt. So it takes them forever. It takes tens of thousands of lives for the mainstream media to start calling the genocide what it is. And even after the murder of tens of thousands of Palestinians, the BBC would continue to interrupt Palestinian guests, for example, and tell them that Israel denies that what's going on is a genocide, giving the Israelis airtime even when the Israelis aren't there. And we know for a fact that this is a bias towards the Israelis, because if a Ukrainian guest was on the BBC talking about Russian war crimes, the BBC would never dare to tell the Ukrainian guest, or the presenter wouldn't dare to tell the Ukrainian guest that the Russians would deny that they're committing war crimes in Ukraine. So we see a clear bias and a clear racism against the Palestinian people. And I think I might get into this more in the later questions. But fundamentally, the Palestinians are the other, and the Israelis are seen as an extension of what is supposedly Western civilization. Several reports over the last few years have exposed the fact that the BBC spends a lot more time discussing the so-called tragedies of Israelis, whilst reducing Palestinian tragedies to numbers, to statistics. So there is it's not just the language; it's also the amount of time that's given to put forward the Israeli narrative versus the time given to Palestinians. It is also the fact that they would use, terms, well, not the BBC specifically, but other mainstream media terms, other mainstream media outlets would refer to Palestinians fighters as, militants or terrorists, while the Israelis, it's the Israeli armed forces. They don't get the same treatment when it comes to labeling, and this is part of a larger pattern of kind of politicizing the language to essentially control the narrative. Because at the end of the day, the language that they use allows them to, again, put the Palestinians to show the Palestinians in a particular light. And even when it comes to discussing just Palestinian civilians or just the Palestinian people, it's always Israel a state versus the Palestinians, a stateless people. We don't, even though the so-called state of Palestine exists as an observer non-member state, I think, in the UN. The UK has recognized Palestine as a country. The mainstream media continues to refer to the Palestinians as a people without a state, delegitimizing the Palestinians in a way, and allowing for the Israelis again to have the upper hand in terms of the narrative. The introduction of independent media on the scene, the supposed democratization of the media, has allowed for more voices to be heard, has allowed for more nuance to enter the conversation. I mean, we're seeing a lot of independent outlets, even from not traditionally from traditionally non-Palestinian or non-pro-Palestinian voices, introducing more nuance. For example, right-wing media figures in the United States, such as Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, questioning the viability of the US's relationship with Israel. Again, introducing these more nuanced perspectives, even though the right wing in the US is firmly on the side of Israel when it comes to the oppression of the Palestinian people in general. But whether it's pro-Palestine or not, the existence of programs, of podcasts, etc., outside of the mainstream does allow for more nuanced conversation. I mean, for example, you've probably seen the videos being created by Double Down News, in which they invite on several personalities. These include Jeremy Corbyn, I think so, Richard Sanders, I think, and others. Most recently, Bobby Villan, and they expose a lot of they expose actors and organizations and aspects of the narratives that are going about. And these videos do very well. And so not only do they add to, or not only do they create nuanced material, or not only do they release or produce a narrative that isn't necessarily allowed to be seen by the mainstream, but rather they're also reached to by many people, or the content itself reaches to a lot of people. So it's in this day and age, it's not only necessary to create this sort of content which isn't seen on the mainstream in order to allow people to find these more nuanced conversations, the truth in many cases, but also it's quite viable, as seen by the likes of Double Down News, in which the content reaches millions of people, and millions of people are now much more better informed about what's going on, not only in the Middle East, but here in the UK as well. The Palestinians, in this case, suffering genocide at the hand of the Israelis, whether it's the Sudanese, the Uyghurs in China, or East Turkestan, or the mine workers in the Congo. All of these individuals who have been oppressed by a system that affects us all globally need to have their voices heard. Not only because it gives more credence to the stories being told, but also because it is their story to tell. A lot of times, all of these mainstream media outlets or people like Piers Morgan would ask the Israelis, "Oh, why don't you allow the mainstream media in?" There are Palestinian journalists in Gaza, and they have been operating, and they've been targeted by the Israelis, massacred. Most notably, Anas Sharif and the entire Al Jazeera staff in Gaza City, killed in their tent. These are people who have been saying, have been raising their voices, have been telling their stories, but they've been ignored by the mainstream media for the most part. And this goes to show that the mainstream media really isn't too interested in listening to the truth as it is relayed by those experiencing the oppression. There are still many barriers. As I've said, they turn a blind eye. But the truth is, I'm not sure that we will get true representation, because the mainstream media, and this might be delving into a different question, but the mainstream media, I don't believe, have it as their priority to inform their audiences, but rather to control the narrative. Has completely changed the landscape. Initially, the majority of people in the West didn't know too much about Palestine, and so they would most likely uh, empathize more with the Israeli occupiers. But since the genocide in Gaza was the first live stream genocide in which the massacres and the bombings would be sent to people's phones all over the world, and the mainstream media would, in a sense, either omit what was happening or lie about what was happening, people began to open their eyes not only to the fact that the Israelis were committing genocide against the Palestinian people, but also to the fact that the mainstream media were not playing the role that they said they were playing. The mainstream media would rather would cover for the Israelis in many cases, and we saw this. I mean, we even seen this today. How the mainstream media covers for the Israelis. So you see people from across the globe finally opening their eyes to the reality of what is happening in Palestine, opening their eyes to the reality of the Zionist entity, what it entails, or what its logical conclusion is. And not only that, but social media allows people to interact with the Palestinians and interact with each other about what's happening in Palestine, creating completely new conversations that we would, not have imagined 10, 20 years ago. So social media has played a very important role in allowing for the truth about Palestine to be dispersed around the world. Mainstream media is an arm of Western empire. The mainstream media has as its top priority to control narratives, to push a particular agenda, and that agenda is that Israel is a normal state. Israel is only defending itself. Israel has the right to exist. The mainstream media, fundamentally, in its creation, its foundation, is opposed to the liberation of peoples around the globe. I think that any criticism of mainstream media will more or less fall onto deaf ears. Because when we take the BBC, for example, the BBC prides itself on being impartial, etc., and yet the Middle East editor wrote a propaganda book for the Mossad, and one of its chair members is also the owner of GB News, which is no, sorry, not GB News, owner of the Jewish Chronicle, which is known to be a Zionist rag that spreads propaganda and denies the genocide against the Palestinian people, and even promotes the genocide of the Palestinian people. So when the mainstream media acts in the interests of the ruling classes, of the establishment, of the empire, uh, the only choice is for the people to look elsewhere, to be informed about what's going on in the world. Of individual reporters and journalists that work within the mainstream system who genuinely want to portray the truth. They genuinely care about the oppressed peoples and the oppressed. There is all the peoples facing genocide, etc., that they cover, and they do their best to promote that narrative, to push that narrative, but they will always find an obstacle in the editorial line of whichever organization, newspaper, or television channel they work for. At the end of the day, whether you do good reporting or not, you might not decide what the headline is. You might not be able to decide which, how much coverage your piece gets. I mean, everyone has a role to play, and I believe these people are playing a vital role in pushing back on certain narratives within these organizations. But at the end of the day, the the editors and the executives and the members of the board, they continue to support genocide. They continue to cover for Israel, and I'm not sure how quickly we can see that change.